not knowing I was going to be running this thing, I don't have a copy of the agenda, so I'm going to guess what's in it. And we'll start with calling the meeting to order. And is there any public audience? Hearing none, let's move to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes for the meeting dated Monday, September 21st, 2020. Did all of you receive a copy of that in your packet?
Yeah, everything looked good.
Does anybody have any alterations, changes, additions? If not, let's just place that on the record. All right. Now, I'm really going to kind of look to the group and just say, we were here together last. We kind of reintroduced ourselves to the concept of the issues that we have we are looking to figure out what to do with this revenue fund. We went through some of the historical information about how we got here. Hello, Maria. Good to see you can join us. And so I think really where we're at now is I know that there's been quite a bit of financial information that has been shared by Amy, as well as others in our group, Jerry. And so I think I'm kind of just going to really open this up to the floor to say, what questions do people have about the information they've received as we look toward deciding what of those three options that were outlined in the memo from the town that we consider doing with the special revenue fund?
Well, I have a bunch of comments, and I don't know if there probably are some questions in there based on all the material we got from Amy and Jerry. So if nobody objects, I'll take 10 minutes to go through. I found the spreadsheet that Amy sent was very helpful, and I spent a lot of time noodling around in that. So bear with me, and I'll just sort of walk you through what I looked at and what questions and concerns and stuff it raised for me. The first thing I looked at was I wanted to have a better understanding of, the year-end appropriations. And I was surprised there were only 4 of those out of the last 12 years, mostly in the latter 6 years or so. And they kind of varied a lot in size. Amy helped me to understand that the year 2019 is sort of a quirky year, and you might as well not pay too much attention to it because there was all sorts of accounting adjustments there to true up things. So none of those numbers sort of fit with what we would expect. And so what I then thought, well, geez, I wonder how the back end subsidy correlates to the front end. I would have assumed that the 4 years when there was a back end subsidy was because there wasn't an upfront subsidy. And actually the converse is true, interestingly. Not only true, but extremely so. The 4 years of back-end subsidies are the 4 highest years of front-end subsidies. So I was sort of curious about that. I don't have any conclusions about it, but I was sort of surprised. I mean, if you look at the year 2014 as an example, the upfront operating transfer from the general fund was $449,000. And at the back end, they got another $261,000 for a total of $710,000. But that's bookended on the prior year with no upfront subsidy, no back end subsidy, and the subsequent year with a small upfront subsidy of $58,000 and no back end subsidy. So what the heck happened in the year 2014? I have no idea.
I think there was a carry forward over the years, Linda. It didn't get appropriated necessarily in the year the deficit was created. So there were carry forwards.
That might have been the case. I have no idea.
If you take a look at operating transfers for 11, 12, 13, and then all of a sudden in 14 you've got a huge one.
A huge one, right.
But there was nothing in 11 or 13, and there was a small amount in 12. But that 14.5 was not reflective of the loss for that year.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a possible explanation. So then I started looking at, okay, well, for years I have heard about the reallocation of costs to the Simsbury Farms Revenue Fund. And I think pretty much everybody recognizes that some of those reallocations, may not have been based on a fact of appropriateness. It's not like Tom spends 70% of his time or 100% of his fringe benefit equivalent just on Simsbury Farms. So, I think we all agree that some of that reallocation should get fixed. But from what I could glean, the proposal is to put 100% of Tom's salary and his AA's salary as well, and fringe benefits into the general fund. But looking at what was the case before all of these supposedly inappropriate reallocations occurred, it was already 50% of his salary that was in the Simsbury Farms. So it was only an additional 20% that got put in there. So once I started, and I kind of checked this out with Amy, to the best of our ability, looking at, what was reallocated inappropriately, if you want to call it that, it adds up to somewhere between $96,000 and $145,000, depending upon the fringe benefit issue. The bank fee, I'm including in there the reallocation of bank fees, unemployment, the additional 20% of the director and AA's salary. As I understand it, the recreation supervisor was always in the Simsbury Farms account. That was not a reallocation. So if we look at only moving those, quote, inappropriate things, that fits easily into the $180,000 upfront subsidy that Simsbury Farms got this most recent year, which for some reason is reported as 195 on this spreadsheet. Amy, can you explain that? Because I remembered it as 180.
180 there? During budget season. The extra 15,000 was the transfer.
Oh, that's the
loss.
That's the back end. You've added in the back end.
Yeah, it's a total transfer.
Oh, all right. I didn't know you'd already totaled the two. I was looking at that as an upfront thing. Okay, so I've sort of got those numbers mixed up then. But at any rate, so as far as I'm concerned, yeah, fix that issue of the former quote inappropriate reallocations. Take them back out. That'll easily fit in the 180. Throw in a little bit more to get to 180, that's fine, and then we just eliminate the 180 up front, and there's no impact whatsoever. But then I started looking at, well, what's the other issues here? And, that's why I started looking at revenue and asked Amy to send you an updated spreadsheet that shows the revenue minus the operating transfers. And when you look at the expenditures, let me look at that first. The expenditures go up, but not an unreasonable amount, kind of in line with a reasonable inflationary increase of 1 or 2% on average. But when you look at the revenue line on the first page, in the year 2009, the revenue minus the operating transfers is $1.7 million. And when you look at the year 2020, the revenue is $1.7 million. So the problem here is that you have flat revenue and increasing expenses. And I don't see that as an expense problem. I see that as a revenue problem. And revenue's a function of price times number of units. I don't know what the source is, but that leads me to start questioning, is this because we don't have enough usage, or because the fees haven't gone up, and the prices haven't gone up to be appropriate? And that's a question that, only Tom can answer. But I did look at, well, what's the source of, because, I think golf seems to be producing reasonably well revenue to meet expenses. But when you look at the rink and the pool and the camps, now the rink and the pool, the expenses are blended together, but the revenue are separated. So if you blend the revenue together as well, And I'm looking at the year 2018 because 2019 was all sort of weird and 2020 has had COVID in it. So in 2018, there was a $96,000 shortfall for the rink and the pool combined. And for the camps in 2018, there was a $266,000 shortfall between revenue and expenses. So I guess where I'm heading is saying go ahead and, fix the $180,000 thing, but before we start transferring more to the general fund, which to me is just moving the problem, not solving the problem, I think we need to drill down on what is this problem. Do we have summer camps that are not adequately attended? Is the price for them not high enough? If they're not adequately attended and the price isn't high enough, those are things that we can fix by either raising the price or eliminating some of the camps. And, the rink is another issue to look at, the rink and the pool. I mean, the rink has pretty high expenses. So, we need to make sure that those, I don't know who skates besides the hockey team at the high school.
Linda, could I interject a little bit? Because there's one variable that you haven't brought into the equation. We're an outdoor facility.
Yep.
You lose revenue when it rains. You lose revenue because the temperature gets too warm for people to skate, and we can't let people go on the ice. And you can't imagine the effect of that. If it's 1 day or 2 days, that's fine. But when you lose a week of ice that you can't rent, that's significant.
Well,
when you have in the summer a spate of cold weather, cold, damp, rainy, cloudy, and you got nobody going to the pool, but you still have fixed expenses.
Right.
That's the equation we've always tried to deal with, and there is no solution to that. And it goes back to what Dave talked about at our last meeting. You can't necessarily look at a pool or a skating rink as a business unless you want to do two things. You want to put a roof over the pool, you want to enclose the rink. Now you control the weather. And I don't think the town would look at several $1 million of capital expenditures at this time to solve a weather problem.
Yeah, well, I would disagree. I'm not suggesting we put a roof over the pool, but I think we need to run the pool and the rink and the camps as reasonably close to businesses as possible. I'm not saying include capital in there, but they ought to break even over a multi-year period. I mean, yes, you're going to have good years and bad years depending upon weather. But if the winters are getting so warm that hardly anyone wants to go skating, maybe it's time to do something different with that skating rink. Spin
You're
it
going to
off,
shut
let
down
the
the youth
pool own
hockey
it.
from having a skating rink?
Well, I don't know what the options are. I'm just saying we need to look at it. If there is not much usage, there may be better things in town. I don't expect that people in town, that taxpayers in town feel obliged to subsidize kids going to summer camp, except for those who are low income, and they get those subsidies through the social services department. So, if wealthy people can afford to send their kid to camp and they happen to choose to send them to the Simsbury town camp, I wouldn't advocate that they should get a subsidy from the rest of the townsfolk. I mean, that's something you should pay for yourself.
Linda.
So it ought to be a price that breaks even.
Linda,
Yeah,
this is
go
Tom.
ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
There, of all the things that we do, whether it's the ice rink, it's the pool, or the camps are the last thing that is not making money. I mean, every program, whether it's a baton twirling program or the summer day camp, tennis lessons, those are making generally 30 to 40% over and above what our materials, transportation costs, and credit card costs are with those programs. The hard cost is the community use items like the cost of the rec supervisor and the cost of the utilities at Simsbury Farms that are also being lumped into that same budget with the day camp. Camp stuff to do has been making money for more than 25 years. I'm not going to take credit for it. It was making money before I started here. but we improved
Well,
it.
maybe I'm misunderstanding what's on this spreadsheet, but I checked it with Amy, and the second line down is, revenue, special programs, camps. So the revenue is $147,000 in 2018, and the expenses for total special programs, which she told me was the camps, is $413,000. So what am I missing there?
I think there's that might be where the reallocation started or whatnot. Those programs do not. I can tell you, we had 60 kids this summer, which out of 100. Normally we could have 100 this summer in there. With COVID, we did 60, and that program with overstaffing still made some money on it. Right. And we have raised the fees as appropriately over the years. For years, when I was running all of the rec programs from 99 to 12, the camp side of things, special programs, was generating over and above my salary. Now things have become tougher. There's other things in the market, but we don't run a program that won't at the very least break even after all costs. Outside of the benefits of, you're throwing with the rec supervisor, when it was myself or when it was Taryn Traeger, you're throwing about $100,000 in benefits and salary at those programs. Now that's hard to make up. And then on top of that, you're allocating money back for lighting at Simsbury Farms when none of those programs even are affected by the lighting at Simsbury Farms. Camp stuff to do. None of them take place there. But those are the costs that I think we're talking about community use. The rec. I'm basically your rec director and one of your rec supervisors right now, and I'm running helping run Halloween things. I'm running movie nights, things like that.
Movie nights.
Those are community use items, and not everybody. The day camp kids shouldn't be paying for my time to go run a movie for Simsbury 350.
Right. No, I agree. So I totally believe what you're saying, Toms, but I still think that there's some drilling down that needs to happen about the pool and the rink then. I think you reasonable people will disagree, and I know you guys feel that the entire town ought to subsidize those few people who skate and use the pool.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't feel that way.
No, so Linda, I think it comes back to that philosophical, and I really thought we got beyond this. I really think, I'm concerned we're going backward here, that we've recognized that it was tax dollars that built that facility and tax dollars that purchased that facility, and it's tax dollars that should be continued to use to operate the facility. We are never going to operate that at a profit because it's not intended to be operated at profit, just as not everybody uses the library. Not everybody uses Simsbury Farms, but we don't expect the library, it's in the general fund, but this particular recreation of swimming and hockey, and let's not leave it at that. It's tennis, it's racquetball, it's a lot more than just a couple of things. And I really thought we were beyond this debate of the town has certain obligations when it builds a facility to continue to maintain and operate those facilities and subsidize the operation of those facilities. Are we, is that something that Linda, philosophically you disagree with? So I can just understand.
Yeah, to be honest, Dave, I have mixed feelings. I mean, I really am a big advocate of the town parks, and because I use them too. But I feel like there are certain things like skating and pool that are really sort of above and beyond the typical kind of park-like things. People play softball, they play soccer, whatever. That doesn't require loads of, personnel to be there full-time. Whereas, at a pool, you have to have full-time staff. At a rink, you have to have very expensive equipment and refrigeration and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a really tiny portion of the people who use it.
But Linda, you're forgetting the fact that we have a recreation supervisor and all the fringe benefits in that facility. So that's $100 and some odd $1,000.
124.
That person eats up in terms of expenses. The other issue I've always had was that rec supervisor trains and manages all of Memorial Pool. Now there's no part of his salary and fringe benefits that goes back against the general fund for all of the work that he does at Memorial Pool. So, it's such a mishmash of what we've done. Pardon?
I said there's a lot that I just don't know. When people use Memorial Pool, do they pay to use it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But our recreation
and-
supervisor is the manager, and that comes out of the revenue fund.
And do the fees for Memorial Pool cover the costs of
No, it goes to
running it?
general fund.
No, we would never make back the fees that it
That's a
cost to
loss.
operate. But it's been sitting in the general fund for 60 years.
Right. Because it's considered.
I guess the only
service
way
the
to
community.
solve this question is almost to do a poll of the taxpayers. Do you want to subsidize these things or not?
But Linda,
I don't know.
they have. Again, if the town built the facility with town money,
Well, we all agree that they should subsidize the capital. I mean, there's no way that these things can break even on capital. It's more sort of a question of the operating expense.
And if you don't subsidize it to any extent, Linda, at some point, let's just take Daily Swim for instance. We've increased the season passes $50 in the last few years, over and above what they were before I got here. So we've added those costs. Minimum wage is going up. We're asking people to pay. I'm asking you that we should be paying, the daily admission people should be paying for the cost of the lifeguards, first aid supplies, the bathing suits that the guards are wearing. But we shouldn't be asking them to be paying, and obviously for the guards too, but we shouldn't be asking them to pay for the water bill, the utility bill, any repair needs for that pool. Those things, just like if somebody walked into I always use this example, if our elevator breaks, the people who go to day camp are helping to pay for the elevator. If the library elevator breaks, the taxpayers, every single one of them as a whole, is subsidizing the cost of that elevator to be repaired. Those are the things the hard costs at Simsbury Farms should be shared by everybody in town. Whether you go to Simsbury Farm, whether a taxpayer goes to Simsbury Farms or they don't, they all benefit from it from a tax standpoint, because the more people that are coming to town, it increases property values. Your taxes are actually probably lower because it's being spread over everybody because you have Simsbury Farms. I don't know, no program. We're not asking anybody to pay for a program that they don't use, but we're asking them not to pay for all of the extra things that make, whether it's Memorial Park or Simsbury Farms Pool, that make that an asset to the town.
all right, if we could,
Yeah,
Maria,
I think
Maria would like to hop on here for a moment. Maria, you have the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a couple of concrete comparisons that will help frame this. And so, as we noted in the study, one of the recommendations was to take the things like the utility costs, essentially the facility costs, and say, let's shift that over to the general fund. And that would be things like energy, cleaning supplies. And again, a couple, I think, of concrete comparisons are the library and the senior center, right? So when people go to library programs, we are not asking library users to pay to keep the lights on at the library. We are not asking library users to pay for cleaning supplies and toiletry items in our restrooms, right? If somebody goes to the senior center and they're participating, let's say, in the lunch program, or they're participating in a senior fitness class, same thing. We're not asking our seniors to help to keep the lights on at Eno. We're not asking seniors to help cover the cost of the supplies in the restrooms. But that is what we are asking of any of our community members using programs through the Parks and Recreation Department. We are asking them to keep the lights on at the building. We're asking them to pay for infrastructure maintenance when things break down. We're asking them to pay for the toilet paper in the restrooms. So that's one comparison. And then similarly, on the staffing side, we're not asking program users at the library to pay for the director's salary and the admin assistant salary. Same thing at the senior center. We are not asking our program users to pay for the salaries of those staff members. What we are asking of our program users and the recreation department is to pay the full load of the Parks and Recreation director's salary, as well as the admin assistant for that department. And they support the entire department. They support parks, they support our culture function, and they support the recreation function. Yet we're asking our recreation users to fully fund their salary and benefits. So that's really where the difference is.
Actually, you've been putting a tax on the users to subsidize the taxpayers.
That's essentially, I would say that's correct, Jerry, a way to frame it. Mm-hmm.
So, but my concern is if you just transfer some of these costs to the general fund, two concerns. One is, what are you going to cut in your budget, Maria, in order to make room for these new costs? And I don't know that you have a whole lot of room to make those cuts. And you and I both know if you come to the Board of Finance with, an 8% increase or something, it isn't going to fly. And secondly, the bigger question in my mind is, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that prior to 2008, 2009, that there were no subsidies from the general fund to Simsbury Farms, that it was, in fact, breaking even.
That's incorrect.
And so the question, is it incorrect? Okay.
There was
Tell me more about
$65,000 a year paid into the Simsbury Farms Fund from the general fund from the first day that they started the revenue fund.
Okay. So, but it has gone up, at least in some years, to 600. Oh no, that's the weird year. So 299 in 2018, 191 in 2017. So it goes up and down a bit.
But Linda, the golf course was subsidizing the rec side of things for years and years and years.
The town asked the golfers to basically subsidize the recreation department.
Yes.
But again, if we move $180,000 worth of stuff out to the general fund and then eliminate the subsidy, in most of these recent years, you've gotten substantially less in total than $180,000 of subsidy. So that ought to work. You ought to be able to break even.
Yeah, again, it comes back to, I thought part of this discussion also originally got started that we were told by a prior finance director that our auditors were very critical of the way in which we were basically subsidizing the revenue fund at the back end, and that we needed to consider getting things in a more recognized budgetary function, which would be that this whole mess started with taking allocations that had never been. And obviously we then started running a much, much larger deficit. And that's what we're trying to fix, is we're trying to fix the fact that we are kind of an albatross as it relates to, I agree that we can debate what's the allocation. Gee, is it 10%, 15, 20, whatever it may be? Because I think that you mentioned early on that there was a 50% allocation of Tom's salary before, but there was no rhyme or reason as to how that number was determined.
Right, and I personally would prefer to see what's called a time and motion study done to actually make the allocation be based on something factual. But
I asked Jerry Toner to do that years ago, Linda, and especially when they shifted from the 50 to the 70 allocation, he just did a quick study just on his phone log. In other words, the number of phone calls that he received or had to call back on. And he said basically the actual numbers were a 100% reversal. It was 30% at Simsbury Farms and 70% general fund.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's the issue of trying to do allocations.
If I may,
I can take you all the way back because I've studied this ad infinitum. And I recall a letter from our finance director several times back that it was sent to both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance when they were discussing the formation of the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund. And he outlined all the issues in advance there. He talked about all they had revenue problems back in 98, 97 with programs. And he said the golf course was for the last 2 years carrying a $545,000 profit forward, but that's neither here nor there. He just basically warned and cautioned the establishment of the Special Revenue Fund specifically because of the allocation issues. He says, you will never do this. It will become a political thing and you'll be changing allocations virtually all the time. My personal preference is to just throw everything back in the general fund where it started and let the golf course run as a special revenue fund separately.
Maria, do you have some comment for us?
Yeah, I do. I think that if we don't, if this group decides to not put this back in the general fund, but to keep all of it in the special revenue fund as it is now, I don't think that this is a problem that we should solve overnight, right? I think it's gradually working towards increasing the contribution from the general fund to cover the community use expenditures. I do think that the analysis did a really good job of pointing out what are the community use expenditures. For example, the director's salary, the admin assistant salary, the facility expenses. But again, if we keep it all in the special revenue fund, I don't think this is something that we need to take care of all in one chunk, right? But to say, how can we smooth this over time? How can we build this up? But again, if we keep it in the special revenue fund, I think that's our reality. We have to sort of face that music, if you will. If we put it all back in the general fund all at once, it takes care of the problem right away, but then it has a much bigger budgetary impact all in 1 year.
Yeah.
And that's been the same issue we talk about every time we form this group.
Right.
If I could, I just, perhaps a practical note here, but I have trouble moving away from the practicality. I agree with what Maria just said. Now, suppose if you start with the philosophy, if the town built it, the town put the capital into it, then the town is responsible for paying the operational expenses. I just don't see the logic of that. I mean, to take a hypothetical, suppose you had a library that 80% of the town used. You built it, and therefore there obviously should be some general revenue to upkeep it. Suppose you built a curling facility, which was very useful, and a lot of people really loved it, but it was only 5%. If you're saying, yes, but we built it with capital, therefore we have to sustain it with operations, I mean, I don't see where that holds. And so I do think that assigning relative values is entirely appropriate. And the fees can vary. I see no problem with that.
That's a good point. I could tell you that Simsbury Farms sees a significant amount more use than Eno Hall does, and yet all of the costs for Eno Hall are absorbed in the general fund budget, and really none of the costs at Simsbury Farms are. I mean, that's conversely. I mean, I think that makes the point the other way.
Sure. So the point is, we do make a subjective judgment.
Yeah. So maybe there's
hey guys, it's
practical. I'll just finish my comment, Chris. I think there's a practical consideration here, and that is, how do we help without incurring a rejection by the Board of Finance? And so I'm trying to gently suggest you can easily deal with 180,000, maybe a little more than that, if Maria agrees that she can cut an equivalent amount from somewhere else in the general fund. But that if you come in saying we want to move the whole thing to the general fund, I don't think it's going to fly. And that's not just me. I mean, that's my gut tells me that's not going to fly. So
I'm there as well.
If you want to make progress,
All right, if I may
make progress, take a small bite.
If I may, Chris Peterson was trying to jump in there, Linda. Chris?
Yep, sure.
Yeah, so just a couple of reference points of where my thinking is. I'm on the same thread that Art is, and Dave, Jerry, I don't think that, I think this is contrary to what you believe, but I don't think that the town is in perpetuity beholden to maintaining an asset because they initially invested in it. I don't think that's the automatic litmus test. That you enter into the
pay for the performing arts.
Yeah. So, but that's I don't think we should. I mean, I just don't think we should use that as the initial perspective. That's not the way I look at this. But having said that, I certainly fall on the side of this is a very difficult conversation for all of us, because interests in things ebb and flow, right? We have made whether it's, Art used the word curling. You could talk tennis, you could talk swimming, you could talk golf. Everything, interest in everything, absolutely. The use of a book versus a digital download. We will face 50, 100 years from now, do we need the library? So these kinds of things are just things in ebb and flow. I don't want the pitchforks to come out from the library committee. I'm on that too. But the reality is that we have to consider these things constantly, and it's an imperfect situation. But I do believe we have made a statement. And Art, I think we had a different committee meeting. Art spoke eloquently about sort of what is the the tapestry that people look at when they consider Simsbury and why they come here. I think our Parks and Rec is one of the strongest threads in that tapestry, and all of the services that come with it. And yes, we are unique. We now have this complex, which are the peers that we often compare ourselves to do not have, still don't have. But the town did make the I think they had the foresight in 1970 or whatever it was to create this added cultural asset and all the services that come with it. And I'm certain over the years, Tom, you go back, Jerry, I'm certain over the years we have added services and we've cut services. And I think we'll call them programs for point of conversation. I am here today to say I will push advocate as strong as possible that we figure out the best path forward without cutting anything that today I believe that facility, and if the facility just by name represents other detached facilities or programs, I would advocate that we do not look at it, and that's how we look to solve this problem. Because unless I'm mistaken, the loss/cost of whichever those programs that we would be looking to, the loss is still there. The cost is still there, no matter what side of the balance sheet it is on. It's ultimately, it's still there. Just because you're moving from one to the other doesn't mean that it goes away. There's also people will say there are not enough people pursuing or participating in this program to recapture the cost of that program. I think that's going to, or some people say, hey, no matter where you put the golf course on its own merits seemingly pays for itself. I think that argument could be made, but it's the optics of how it's reported shows whether the golf course makes money or not. So what I'm an advocate of right now is one, that we that we look to do this, I think, in a stepped fashion. I think that is the best path forward, in my opinion, is to look to do this in a stepped fashion. But it is to me inevitable that there is going to have to be a real cost that is associated with the event, whether it's staggered or immediate. There's a real cost that's going to have to be realized and dealt with when we move it into the general fund. It becomes a different line item in our budget. And I don't think that, I hope that the Board of Finance doesn't look at it as if it is a new additive cost. Because I don't think we should, that is not the way that this should be considered at all. So I'll stop there.
No,
I think, Chris, it would just be a shifted cost. But I think you're absolutely right in saying we need to look at, there is a loss, and I don't know enough about these programs to be judging. I obviously made a mistake on the camps, but somewhere down the road, if there aren't any people skating in the rink other than 12 people who show up once a week, you got to think about, all right, do we continue this or not? If there are only, 6 people swimming in the pool, I mean, I think that's what you were getting at, that at some point, if there aren't enough people there, you have to rethink whether that's really something you want to keep sustaining. And maybe those have lots of users. I have no clue. And in which case, that's exactly what I just want to say. That's exactly what I'm saying. But I don't know that we do it at the same time. I don't think that that's what this working group is about. I don't think that we do it at the same time to make unless we're charged with the responsibility of how to account. Where does this whole big pot of stew? What side of the menu does it show up on? And that's where it's
how do we figure out the ingredients of the stew, or do we take one away or add one back? That's not what I thought we were charged with. So
No,
that's what
we're trying to figure out where the money should be allocated to. That's all.
Let's do
It's
this.
not a change of cost, not a change of revenue. It's an accounting change.
Correct. I'm looking right at the document created by our crack staff here in the town, and I'm going to just put that right in front of everybody because I do think we're losing sight of what our charge was. Recommendations. Number 1, accounting for expenses. Currently, expenses are split between the special revenue fund and the general fund. Staff recommends, not Park and Rec, not Board of Finance, staff recommends that one of the following 3 accounting methods, thank you for finding that, Amy, be adopted moving forward. All expenses to be accounted for in the general fund, all expenses to be accounted for in the special revenue fund, all expenses to be accounted for in the general fund with the exception of the golf course. Our charge wasn't to parse out, in minutia. That's not what this group is supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be more of a conceptual group, and I think we need to keep that in mind because if we don't, we're going to just waste another. Jerry and I have been doing this long enough now. We're going to just waste another couple of years messing around with this thing. This is what the town recommended. It's right in front of all of us. I think we need to focus our discussion on that because that's what our charge was as we put the group back together.
I respectfully disagree, David. I don't think the staff gets to tell us you have 3 choices and there are none other that you can consider. If there are other choices, we can consider them. I do agree that our charge was to look at how the expenses and revenues should be accounted for.
No,
But I think there are other options beside these 3.
Well, but part of that comes back to, and again, I agree somewhat with Chris's comments from a standpoint of we can never lose sight of the fact that just like a senior center and a library, all right, can we do all this at one time? Perhaps we can't. That would disappoint me, but I understand that. But the idea to say that we're only going to allocate enough money where you can find enough cuts, I respectfully disagree with. We didn't create this problem. It was created by everyone before us. But part of the problem is you can't just say it's a zero-sum game. Let's fix the problem. Let's not tiptoe around this. I agree. Can you do it all in 1 year? Board of Finance is going to go crazy. But at the same token, are we going to say, oh, gee, we're going to do this? And again, Maria's suggesting that this is an allocation process. I think then if that's what we can, at least in general as a group, agree upon, at least then we've focused our discussion more than we have it here today.
So, Dave, can you explain a little further what you just made the comment that the problem was created by people before you. How are you defining what problem they created?
That we had expenses that had never been attributed to the special revenue fund in an effort to avoid a mill rate increase were taken out of the general fund and put into our special revenue fund, which then created the problem that we run at a deficit that those folks in Board of Finance had to subsidize periodically through time.
And that's what I was saying early in the meeting, that if you look at those specific expenses, as best as I can determine them, and I could be wrong, that's less than $180,000. So I am totally on board with you for fixing that particular problem. Let's undo those things that were allocated to get them out of the mill rate, put them back in the general fund. But that's not hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is what's being recommended in these 3 options.
Part of the 3 options also, I think, takes into account, and we've all been given so much data here in the last couple of 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming.
All the different towns, the revenue funds versus other types of funds versus allocations. And perhaps we all need to take a step back and really look at that and let staff make recommendations as to what would be an appropriate allocation. I totally disagree, my opinion, that Tom does not spend 50% of his time operating the golf course. That's why we have a golf superintendent. Right. That's why we have a golf pro. How that anybody ever came up with that number is beyond me. That we should look at this and look at it from a standpoint of, I don't disagree with you. Does Tom spend some of his time running the golf course? Sure does.
You mean Simsbury Farms, not just the golf course.
The revenue fund, the golf course. That sure he does, but it's not 50% of his time.
Right.
And so to say that, we're going to make that okay, so you get the point. That
Yep.
I just
Yep.
okay. I'll leave it at that. Comments?
I think if I go back 6 years ago, when all of a sudden our first revenue fund subcommittee was formed, the recommendation out of Parks and Rec at that time, there was about a $341,000 identified that should not be in the fund. We would have solved that problem 6 years ago, and we wouldn't be talking today. Now, over this 6 year period of time, the town has started to make allocations. We've now gone up from a zero allocation in 2012 to $180,000 allocation in the year 2019, 2020. So half of the problem that we identified back 6 years ago has been made up with allocations from the general fund to the revenue fund. I think at this point, all we're talking about is trying to find the other half of the 360, or, the effect on the mill rate would be $180,000 increase to the general fund budget.
And I'll just
am I close to being pretty close on that, Amy?
Yeah, well, Jerry, those numbers I recall, you're spot on the numbers, at least in the past that we reviewed, and I remember that we were somewhat disappointed that we were on the right road to fixing the problem, but we wanted to bite the bullet. And
basically, these same three recommendations were what you and I had talked with our joint committee 6 years ago. So we haven't gotten any further than we now have an allocation to the special revenue fund, but nothing else has changed other than we created an equipment fund for the golf course.
No, and Jerry, I think in all fairness, from a Park and Rec standpoint, we appreciate the recognition by the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen that we needed that allocation.
Yes.
Now, did we all want to see the whole allocation? The answer was yes.
Sure.
All we're trying to do now is take the rest of the steps necessary to really go ahead and address the complete problem without having to, extremely adversely affect the mill rate.
And not have to meet again in 6 years. If we're around.
Can I ask, Maria, I wouldn't mind if you could just pipe in here and perhaps make a suggestion of what can we do. We're already now into this, coming up on an hour. Any suggestions on what we can do between now and another meeting to better define what we're trying to accomplish and then what those numbers look like?
Sure. Something that Jerry just mentioned that I thought was really interesting, and Jerry, please correct me if the number was wrong, was that when this group took a look at this about 6 years ago, you thought about $340,000?
I think it was about between right around 350.
Yeah, what's really interesting about that, and I didn't know that, but two of the three recommendations that staff had suggested, which I think we probably feel most strongly about, was a portion, again, of Tom and Krista's salary, as well as the facility expenses. And those two items come up to around $340,000 or $350,000.
Isn't that interesting?
Something? That's really kind of a fascinating,
Problem
point.
would have been solved.
Yeah. So let's say,
Maria, are you talking about the three things in number one? Those three things there, A, B, and C.
Right here, the
457
of salaries and
457,000.
if you take A and C. So A and C is what staff would feel probably most strongly about. So those two items come up to, it's around what, 340 or 350?
340, 350.
Yeah, so almost the same number, right, that this group, it sounds like, came up with about 6 years ago. So if you take that, say, 340, deduct the 180 that we're currently at, we probably have to close that gap about $160,000. And again, that's a really big chunk to bite off in 1 year. But I think if we came up with a plan, if folks generally felt comfortable with A and C, how do we over time close that gap? How do we close that $160,000 gap? Is it, we work on it for a period of 5 years, 4 years, 6 years? I mean, we can do it as aggressively or, over a period of time that's longer. That's going to help sort of make everybody, feel comfortable. But again, I think that's something that, maybe for the next meeting, staff could come back with some scenarios to show, again, a few different scenarios over how do we close that $160,000 gap over, say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, give us some options to maybe look at in terms of a recommendation for moving forward. And perhaps what staff could also do for the next meeting, Dave, would be to circulate just a quick little poll. And, kind of working right off of the study, maybe we ask the 6 members of the work group, say, if we scroll back up, Melissa, to, for example, the accounting method, we put in a spreadsheet those 3 accounting methods, and then maybe an other category, as Linda suggested. So we can start to see if there's some consensus from the work group about where thoughts and feelings and opinions are. I think that would be helpful if, again, on paper, we can see where maybe there's some consensus starting to form. Similarly, if we scroll down to number 2, we could ask the work group members those same questions, of these, 3 scenarios, which do you feel most comfortable with? I think that might be helpful just to start getting to see if we are getting some consensus from members and where that is. So that's a little homework assignment that staff could, kind of send out that survey, I think, working off of this memo. Oh, I'm sorry. And one more item, Melissa, could you scroll down to the golf course item as well? I mean, that's just sort of, I think, a simple, yes or no in terms of whether or not folks feel that we should continue to, manage in-house versus contract out. But again, we can send that out, I think, to the work group members, coalesce and see where we're getting some consensus, report that back out to the group, and also provide some of those maybe funding scenarios over a period of years.
So is there a recommendation about moving the golf course management?
Well, it's something that people will bring up from time to time. I'm sensing, particularly from the Park and Rec Commission, that they support continuing to manage in-house. At a staff level, we feel continuing to manage in-house is most effective. But since it was something that is continually brought up over and over again, it was a topic we addressed within the report and felt
if I
that.
could interject a little something.
Yeah.
Is there anyone in this group who thinks we should?
Connecticut has not had a good track record of bringing golf course management into public facilities. Just talked to Hartford, and there are 2 golf courses. They just had to spend $10 million on repairing what a prior management company did to their courses. And the same with East Hartford. That's a different situation, but they're not good situations, and you will actually end up adding a layer of expense.
Yeah.
Because the
I think
management
you'd
company
probably
wants
get
to make a
consensus.
profit.
I mean, we have a 49-year track record of success at the golf course. Why would we want to give it to somebody else?
So
I don't think there's much argument on this one.
I would just X that out and say
exactly.
no.
I think we can generally say I think we have some consensus on that.
Right.
That we really, again, we appreciate all the efforts, and I agree with Jerry's comments. I even recently played a local course run by a private management company, and they decided they couldn't afford a generator when we had the power outage, and therefore their fairways looked like a barnyard. So
that used to be a premier golf course.
So I think let's take that one off the list. But Maria, really constructive. I really appreciate your insight in. I think it's a far more focused approach moving forward to have staff look at basically, again, how if we call it just a general number, about a 160 gap, is how do we fix it? How long should we? Any suggestions on how long to fix it? And perhaps we add a section 4 to discuss, Linda, some of your concerns about, are we limited to just 3 options? Perhaps not, but I really think, at least if nothing else, I would feel like that we maybe accomplished something tonight.
My only
can we
other
go
comment
back, Dave,
is transparency.
Right, Linda?
That gap is never showed to the taxpayers until a transfer out of reserves is made.
No, agreed, Jerry. I do agree with that. Linda?
Yeah, can we go back and talk about number 1 a little bit further and maybe hear from Amy or Maria as to what they've given 3 options here. And all expenses are now accounted for in the special revenue fund. I'm assuming that's what, but
that's no change.
I'd just like to hear a little more about why they suggest
everything outside of park
expenses, but not revenue. I'm just confused by that.
My understanding, and again, anybody, Tom or anybody's, my understanding is that that's basically status quo.
Right, but I'm just wondering why it's only talking about expenses and not revenue. I mean, right now, all expenses and revenue are accounted for in the special revenue fund. And so the other two options there, are they talking about moving that just didn't make sense to me to only.
No, the revenue would move
expenses.
along with the expenses to wherever
Okay,
the
so that's-
expenses are accounted for.
Yeah, I think it was
I
just
have
the
a
way it was
tendency to be
written,
literal.
but yeah.
Okay, I'm being too literal. Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other comments? Okay. Hearing none, then I take it.
Yeah, I had just on those three.
Yep.
Why not have a bullet where we could consider something other than the golf fund? All expenses to be accounted for in the general fund with the following exceptions.
I think that's what Maria said before, to add a fourth
I
option.
think we're going to add.
All right. Okay.
All right. Well, as always, thank you, everybody. You've taken time out of your day to debate this once again. I will also say we all recognize we have our own personal agendas and viewpoints, and everyone's opinion is respected and appreciated. So, Maria, what is a timetable that you might suggest for us?
What we can do, and I know Linda's a little pressed for time because she'll be traveling soon. So I'll go back and take a look to see, with our doodle poll, if there were any other dates that we had thrown out there that was sort of shaping up for the group. If not, we'll try to get back to the drawing board and see if we can find, again, some other dates before, Linda's off on her trip. If
She
not,
can't leave.
yeah, I know, Linda,
If
you
not,
can't go.
go without me.
Or I was going to say, is there
I'll
a
talk to Mark.
possibility you might be able to call in from the road, maybe by like a cell phone or something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do a Zoom, but
Would
I
that
can
be
always do
possible?
a call. Yeah.
But you could do an audio. That would be wonderful. Okay, that might help just again with trying to find our next
Sure.
date. So, okay,
Yeah.
great. Wonderful. Thank you.
That's good, Linda, because we're far more attractive over the phone than we are on the Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I hear anything further? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Motion to adjourn. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.